Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Big Easy Sports Talk podcast. My name is Nick Garisco, and I'm here with Michael Pelichet. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you hear today, please subscribe to this podcast and give us a great rating on iTunes. As always, you can tweet us your questions using the hashtag BestQuestions, and we'll debate them live in the fourth quarter of each show. Today, we're going to be covering the firing of Pelicans GM Dell Demps and recapping the best and worst moves during his tenure. We'll be examining the Saints' offensive line in the first of our Saints State of the Franchise positional breakdowns, and we'll tackle this week's best questions on LeBron, dunking or threes, the best Saints players right now, and the best Saints team of all time. But let's tip off with the story of the week, and that's Dell Demps getting let go by the Pelicans. Michael, we devoted the first half of our episodes of this podcast so far to talking about Anthony Davis, and we specifically discussed what would happen if AD were to get hurt after the NBA forced the Pelicans to play him. Well, last Thursday, sure enough, against the Thunder, AD left the arena to go get an MRI on his shoulder, and Gail Benson responded authoritatively and swiftly, firing Dell Demps, presumably for the handling of the AD situation. Michael, what led to the firing and why this timing?
I think what the Pelicans are trying to do is they're trying to establish Gail as an owner. I think they're trying to show that Gail's not going to put up with nonsense. She's not going to be a passive owner. And I think this is sort of the opportunity that presented itself. And it was sort of one of those things where they could say, look, I mean, we're not tolerating this. And more specifically, Gail could say that. And I think that was exactly what happened.
Yeah, I love that Gail's being aggressive here. I think a lot of people, when Tom Benson died, I think a lot of people thought that Gail Benson was just going to be kind of a figurehead for the team. And now we're seeing her make, swift decisions and very strong decisions. I mean, you're probably right. Dell Demps was probably going to get fired at the end of the year, but she's taking what the NBA has done to the Pelicans. We use the term bullying the Pelicans into playing AD. She's taking that, and she's taking a stand on that. And as I talked about it last week, that's what I wanted to see. I really like this. I mean, I wish that she kind of fired back at the NBA, but indirectly it sounds like she's at least saying, maybe Dell Demps should have done something about this.
I think that might be the case. I think that this is a really convenient timing for all of it. I think it's something that they were always going to do. And the more I think about it, I think they wanted to get a GM in with a lot of time so that whenever they're going to trade Davis this summer, whoever's in place, they don't have to rush to hire someone. They don't have to put someone in a situation where he's trading the future of the franchise, or not the future of the franchise, the current state of the franchise, in a week or 2 weeks or anything like that. I think it gives him time to assemble his staff and all of those things. So I do think, a small part of me does think that they were actually upset. A lot of it feels staged to me. And I don't think it's a bad thing, though. I think, like you're saying, I think it's good that they're taking action. I think it's great that they didn't trade Davis before the deadline. I think those both speak to at least a little bit of promise for our franchise moving forward.
Right. And even if they did use the timing of the injury, or so-called injury, we'll say, as an excuse to fire Dell Demps, action is better than no action. I mean, we both said that, He's been here for 9 years. He's made some good moves, some poor moves, but mainly been underwhelming, I think, in both of our accounts. And I think the Pelicans fans would agree that when you have a superstar like Anthony Davis, probably, easily a top 10 player and asset in the NBA, and you haven't been able to do more than win, I believe, one playoff series with him in the last 7 years, I think that it is probably time to move on and see what the next GM could do. Not necessarily with Davis, of course, because he'll be gone, but just in terms of rebuilding everything. If, for lack of better words, the logic behind it is maybe if Dell Demps couldn't build with Anthony Davis, then we sure don't want him trying to build without Anthony Davis, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I don't think Dell has been as poor here as some people would probably say. I think at the beginning it was rough. I think that he made a lot of moves in the beginning that were not very good. I think that he didn't do a great job of asset management. I think the last few years he's sort of I think you see that he's actually made a lot of decent moves, or even past decent good moves, but I think he was really hamstrung by the moves that he had made previously. And I think that ultimately, like you're saying, he's been here for 9 years, and I mean, 7 years with Davis, and I don't think he's done a good enough job to warrant keeping him. And that's not yeah, GM shelf life is short, and that's the reality of the situation. There's high pressure, and you have to perform very quickly, and it hasn't been overwhelmingly good enough to keep Dell and to justify
The team's
it.
been very patient with him. I know GM life is short, but 9 years seems way above average. I think that's more than enough time to establish whether this is going to be the guy or we're going to have to move on to some new management. I know for the Saints, for example, Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis, they kind of split the show there. And they kind of struggled for a bit ever since Bounty Gate. After winning the Super Bowl, ever since Bounty Gate, they kind of struggled in free agency. They made some big name blunders, spent a lot of money on guys like C.J. Spiller and Brandon Browner and Jarius Byrd, for example. But then Jeff Ireland, who was the former GM of the Dolphins, came and he kind of started at least helping with the draft. And the Saints all of a sudden started hitting on a lot of these picks. Jeff Ireland helped the Saints hit on Ryan Ramczyk and Kamara, for example. Is there anyone in the Pelicans franchise has helped Dell Demps move in the right direction and maybe, I wouldn't say steer the ship, but at least helped navigate?
You could possibly point to Danny Ferry as a special advisor being something that's been a big change for us. That's happened a couple of years ago, and it's possible. Danny Ferry was actually with the Hawks a good while back, and he had made a lot of good moves. So you could maybe point to that as a difference. But again, I guess my thing with all management moves is you never know what's coming from the top. You don't know what the agendas are. You don't know who's really deciding what. We can point back to the deadline and say, I don't know if it was Dell's decision not to trade Davis. That might have been ownership or Loomis or anybody like that. So it's hard for me to figure out who you can really assign blame to, who you can really credit for things. But certainly it seems that since Ferry has been here, there has been an increase in our ability to make good moves as a franchise.
And he's been named the interim GM, right?
That's correct.
It's been tough to evaluate who really has the decision-making power in terms of Loomis or Dell Demps over the years because they kind of have an interesting dynamic there. It's tough because I know Loomis is also dealing with the Saints a lot. If I had to guess, Loomis is more in charge of the salary cap perspective of the NBA because that's kind of what his forte is for the Saints. That's just an estimation, though. I would guess that Dell Demps has more involvement in the basketball talent evaluation and the team building evaluation. Do you think that's fair to say?
I'm not really sure. I think it's certainly at some level you have to say he does have a job, so he's making some decisions, whether it's, hey, you have this kind of flexibility with what we can pay or whatever it is. At some point, he's either gathering information or whatever. I mean, those people above him don't have time to be doing that for two franchises. It's hard enough to do for one. So there's certainly some blame on Dell. It's just a matter of how much, and whether it's the salary cap or whatever that Loomis is in charge of. I really don't know. I don't know exactly what the line of authority is on all of these things.
Let's talk about Dell Demps' best moves and worst moves, because there's a lot of them. I mean, you're a GM for 9 years, and you're going to make a lot of moves.
Let's start with the worst so we can end on a more positive note.
I'm going to go ahead and talk about what I think his worst move is. And you probably agree with it. You probably agree. I think most Pelicans fans would agree. I hope they would at least. But Omar Ashik, we signed him to a huge deal. But at the time, I remember everyone being stunned with this deal. Even casual basketball fans were either like, I can't believe we paid him so much. Give me some perspective on the Omar Ashik deal and how crippling it was to the franchise.
Okay, so I also have that as the worst move. At that time, Davis was so skinny, and Davis was really getting beat down when he was playing center. So a lot of the re-signing of Ashik was related to that. They wanted to play Davis at power forward, whatever you want to call it. And Ashik just happened to be someone that we could keep. And Ashik was not very good at the time. Like you said, he'd had some very good season in Chicago on their bench unit. He had a lot of defensive abilities that kind of got phased out by the way that the NBA is played today. But there were things to like. And what I didn't like about it was that it was just so long of a contract. And it was so they did overpay him. Now, the reason they overpaid him, and one of the reasons they even signed Ashik, is because we were already over the cap. So when you're over the cap, you only have certain exceptions to make moves. One thing that you do have, though, is that if you have bird rights on someone, like we've talked about, you can pay more for them. So Ashik basically was signed partially because we didn't have a full $10 million to sign on anybody outside of the Pelicans. So we wouldn't have been able to use that full amount on anybody else. Now, so they tried to find someone who could take that beating and then also could allow Davis to thrive as a four. So, I mean, that was really what it was for. And from that perspective, in some ways, it's been successful. I mean, Davis has been, he's been hurt a decent bit, but imagine how much more he would have been hurt if he were playing that position earlier. So
right.
It was very bad. He probably could have picked someone better in free agency for $2 million or for anything like that. But there was some reason for that move. But it was very bad.
I mean, this is a guy who, in the first quarter of the game, he'll fall on himself hard, or he'll come down and turn his ankle, and he'll miss a game or two or three. And this happens several times throughout the course of most seasons of his career. A lot of people question his toughness. If you were to knock AD at all, it seems like it is kind of frustrating. From a superstar perspective, it seems like other superstars are getting hurt less than Anthony Davis is, especially from a nicked up perspective.
Yeah, he gets hurt in these minor ways as much as anybody that I can remember, at least in a Pelicans uniform. I think, some of that, this is a tough league. This is 82 games, and
right.
Davis is not a big guy. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of muscle. He kind of does now, but I mean, that took a while to develop.
It did.
I think he reminds me, like, the good news about Davis as a player is he's all limbs, right? So he's tall, he's got long arms. That's really great. The bad news is he's all limbs. He looks like he's like a baby deer out there or something like that. Like every time he falls, it's kind of awkward. He's so graceful and such a good athlete. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot of really good things there, but
yeah,
the way that he moves, it just seems unstable in its nature.
And sometimes his athleticism could even hurt him because not many players are going up to get the alley-oops 3 feet in the air like Davis can. And eventually there's going to be players' feet are going to be under him. He's going to land the wrong way when he's up that high, or the pass is errant, or whatever the case is. Not to make excuses for Davis or even justify some of his injuries. I just wanted to make the point that it does seem like over the years he's had his fair share of bruises and soft tissue injuries. And we kind of saw that last Thursday. I mean, that was a very similar situation to what we've seen over the past 7 years. Now, he did leave the stadium.
I'm trying to figure out if it's scripted or not scripted. The fact that his agent was the one that walked him out in street clothes, I mean, was it really an MRI? Did the Pelicans order the MRI? Did Davis want the MRI? What are the reasons behind it? Was the Pelicans' reaction to it, was that a purely PC sort of thing, or maybe PC is not the right word, but sort of a way of addressing something and making it look good? I don't know. I think it doesn't look good. I'll say that. It doesn't look good when you leave with your agent. Now, if AD had left with anyone else, it probably wouldn't have been as bad. But given what Clutch Sports has been doing behind the scenes and given all the leveraging that they're trying to do, it looks pretty bad on Davis, I think. I think you should have some awareness of, you forced the team into playing you, and you're going to leave the stadium after a shoulder contusion. It looks terrible to me.
Right, and I want to reiterate my point from last week that I don't know why in the world Anthony Davis's camp and his agent wanted him to step on the court at all. And then we saw him actually play in the All-Star game last night, where I think he only played 5 minutes, but he had a dunk, or an alley-oop dunk, I believe. And, everyone's just kind of holding their breath. So the injury must not be that serious.
Yeah, I don't know why he's playing at all. And certainly, like you're saying, in the All-Star game, I mean, that's for those of you who don't watch the All-Star game, it's a joke. I don't care who wins All-Star game MVP. It's no defense. They're in there to put on a show, and you see some cool things, but it's really just running up and down the floor and dunking.
Yeah.
And Davis, there's no reason. I mean, I guess he only played 5 minutes, but I think that it doesn't look good. Again, the optics around this are pretty bad, just like they were when he left the stadium.
They are, because now they hurt the Pelicans' chance of saying, hey, this injury, it's not too serious, but we should sit him out like a game or 2 or 3 games. Every game could help that we sit him out. And now we're probably not able to justify to the NBA and say, oh, hey, he's kind of hurt, we're going to set him out for the next 2 games. Because the obvious comeback or counter to that is, no, he played in a meaningless All-Star game. So I do think that move kind of hurts the Pelicans. Maybe I'm starting to get sour grapes here, but I really didn't like his comments on the Instagram remark. Anthony Davis, for those of you who don't know, said that he was going to leave a nice, sweet Instagram message for all of us like the rest of the guys who leave do. And it just kind of seemed very not genuine, for lack of better words.
I think if you listen to most of Davis's interviews, it seems like they were written like using a book of cliches.
Right.
In general, I think that Davis, this is my personal take, and I don't know if this is founded upon anything good here, but I do think that Davis is uncomfortable voicing these things. So I think he really wants to get out of here, but he also doesn't know how to handle it because that's not really his personality.
Right.
Like, I don't think Davis is a bad guy at all. I think Davis is just someone looking out for his own interest, and I think he's uncomfortable voicing it. And I think they've really made a pitch the last couple of years to highlight AD as a leader, especially once Cousins left, to show, this is AD's team, this is AD's team. And I don't know if that's the role that he's meant for. And I don't mean that as a negative. I think someone who can be out of the limelight but still be a star, I think that's an awesome thing. So I don't know why they want to make him into something that I don't think that he is.
Right. It kind of seems like he's more of a Robin than a Batman, and Robin's necessary. You need Robin. Teams need a Robin now, especially since it's a star-studded league and it's dependent on stars. But in terms of a leadership perspective, it seems like he's always been a little passive.
Right, exactly. I agree. And again, that's good if you have someone who's an active leader. But if you don't have an active leader, well, you need someone to be that leader. And it's probably better if it's your best player. So it's just a weird situation to be in.
And the Pelicans tried to get kind of that. I wouldn't say they were trying to usurp Anthony Davis's role with in the Dell Demps' trade with DeMarcus Cousins, but they were certainly trying to get another star. And at the time, I really respected the fact that the Pelicans were kind of going. It seemed like at least they were going all in, and I liked it from the perspective was that they had a chance to acquire a star for pretty cheap, right? And they went out and they did what they had to do to beat other teams to the punch, and they got DeMarcus Cousins. And the reason it was a cool move at the time was that nobody was really beating the Warriors from a normal basketball perspective. Like, you were going to have to, be like Apple. You're going to have to think different. The fact that the Pelicans had DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis, and that was going to be very tough for the Warriors to defend. But it was also going to be tough for them to match up to our size if we were ever going to get to that. But unfortunately, Cousins got hurt. But do you think the DeMarcus Cousins trade was one of Dell Demps' better moves?
I thought that was his second best move. I thought, I think that was the perfect risk to be taking. So, and this is sort of illustrating what we're seeing right now. So Davis is wanting to leave, and that's because we were on a clock. And when you're on a clock, like we were when we acquired Cousins, they knew that they had to do something, and it's a chance. It's not a sure thing. If it were a sure thing, we wouldn't have traded the package that we had to get DeMarcus Cousins, and that's the risk that they took. And I thought it was a great risk. I think if it had worked out perfectly, it could have been a really, really good team, maybe winning 53, 54 games a year in the West. That would have been something to be proud of. Instead, they actually were on a pretty good streak right as Cousins went down. And
Right.
They might have been figuring it out. It might have just been luck. I don't know. But, we're a pretty good team, and I think he served a purpose. And not just because of Davis working with Davis, but I think also when Davis went down, we really struggled because we did not have volume scorers. And there are limitations to volume scorers. But when Davis goes down, we needed someone to pick up the slack and to basically carry that burden. And Cousins was that guy. So I think it was a great move. I don't fault them at all for taking the risk they did. You can maybe fault them for not having the right kind of assets to get the star where there aren't question marks. But I think overall, given where we were at that time, that was a really good move.
Right, especially because if DeMarcus Cousins wouldn't have tore his Achilles, and if maybe he would have stayed here a little longer, stars attract stars, and nowadays at least. And a lot of players would have wanted to play with Drew Holiday, DeMarcus Cousins, and Anthony Davis had that trio kind of stayed intact. So I respect going out to get the star. But you said that was his second best move. What was his first best move?
I think it's Drew Holiday. We kind of talked about it on the first podcast. Drew Holiday, when they signed him to that contract for 5 years and $126 million, that was not the prevailing sentiment that Drew was worth that. They took a risk on that. And look, Drew has been awesome. If you go back to that Portland series, Damian Lillard is a really good player. CJ McCollum is a really good player. Drew Holiday was by far the second best player in that series, only next to Anthony Davis, who was incredible as well. So Drew Holiday was locking down both those guards. They're getting a lot of help because they were trapping with the bigs, and they're basically getting the ball out of Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum's hands. But Drew Holiday was everywhere that series, and his offense was great too. And Again, that was not something that everybody thought that he was capable of. And I thought that was an awesome move. And I don't think he gets enough credit for that, Dell.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people thought we paid way too much for Drew Holiday, and we were able to extend him too. And he's such a dominant defender, and it really was fun to watch against the Blazers, because in that series at that time, and that was kind of like the peak of the Pelicans' existence, to be honest, because they had Anthony Davis, Drew Holiday, and Mirotic all playing like, honestly, I'm not saying they were all top 15 players in the NBA, but they were playing like it at the time. They were all hot, and that was just really fun to watch.
Yeah, and we probably won't get that for a while, but I'm grateful for that happening. I'm grateful for that contract being handed out. So
overall, how would you rate Dell Demps' tenure here on a scale of 1 to 10?
I hate saying this. I'd say 2 or 3. I think he was below average. I think the last few years I'd rate him around a 5. I think he's been an average GM since Solomon Hill. I think a lot of the moves that he made to fill in the gaps with players who on cheaper contracts and stuff like that, I think a lot of those are pretty good. I don't think he's traded draft picks for players for a good while, so he hasn't really had the chance to draft high in the draft. But I'd say that I think that a lot of his moves more recently were pretty good moves. Not enough to be, oh, I'm really excited about this, but I mean, besides Cousins, because I was really excited about that. But yeah, I'd say like overall 2 or 3. I think the last few years you could go 5 or 6. I think he's been average to above average the last few years.
Right. Dell Demps seems like a good guy, but I think it's safe to say that most Pelicans fans will not miss his management. All right, we're going to move on to the Saints after this. We're starting a state of the franchise. We're going to break down one position each podcast during the offseason and kind of give analysis of last year's individual performances and kind of where we stand going forward. And we're going to start with the offensive line right after this.
Are you looking for something fun to do this weekend? Make the drive to the Instigator Ranch and Hatchery in Covington, Louisiana. Home of more than 2,000 alligators, a guided tour gives you the opportunity to observe and learn all about these unique creatures. You can hold small alligators and alligator eggs in your hands while a baby gator hatches from it. Seriously, it's incredibly wild. These tours are year-round and under $20. The Instigator Ranch has 4.8 stars on Yelp and is 99% rated on Groupon. Experience the life of Louisiana's most ancient residents. Check out the Instigator Ranch in Covington.
So this is our first state of the franchise, and in this, we're basically going to look at all the different Saints positions, and we're going to look at where they are right now and where they might be moving forward. So let's start with the tackles. So Nick, talk about the tackles that we have right now. Are they under contract? Are they good? And just kind of give us some more information on both of them.
Terron Armstead, our left tackle, he's one of our most important players. He's one of the best offensive tackles in the league. He doesn't get a lot of credit, actually, as one of the best tackles in the league. The line play in the NFL is so horrible right now. A lot of that has to do with the defensive line being so much more athletic than the players on the offensive line. And a lot of it has to do with college transitions. These guys are playing spread offenses in college. They're not doing a lot of power run concepts. And a lot of these techniques that they're doing in college are not really transitioning well to the NFL. So when you have an elite offensive tackle like Terron Armstead, it is extremely valuable, especially when you have a great quarterback like Drew Brees. Armstead's only weakness is that he gets hurt all the time. He's never played in a full 16-game season in 5 years as a starter. He's only played in 27 of 48 possible games in the last 3 years. But when he plays, the Saints offense is so much better. And I'm not kidding. Like, honestly, a lot of people don't think that the offense could really make a left tackle could really make that much of a difference. But I'm telling you, Drew Brees' splits with and without Terron Armstead on the field are substantially stark. I mean, Drew Brees is so much better when Terron Armstead is playing. And Armstead's in his prime. He's young. We've signed him to a huge contract. He'll be here a while. We just really need him to stay healthy. Last year, for example, Armstead missed 5 games, and it was right during the time that Drew Brees kind of had his slump. You know, it was weeks 11 through 15, and that was kind of right when our offense took a step back. And Terron Armstead certainly had a lot to do with that.
So what about Ramczyk?
Ryan Ramczyk, awesome. Probably the best run blocker on the team, I would say. And he's in his rookie deal, which is significant because he ended up being a hit in the draft. So now we have him for the next 3 years, and we only have to pay him $2.5 million for the next 2 years. And that third year will increase. But $2.5 million for the next 2 years. He's going to be a Saint until 2022. And Ramczyk was able to start every game last year, all 17 games. I will say that when I talk about the starters and the games played, I'm excluding the Week 17 game where all the starters pretty much sat out for at least a half. I'm excluding that because I don't think it's really relevant. But he started 17 of 17 meaningful games for the Saints. And I also think he's probably a top 12 offensive tackle in this league. So the Saints have, I would argue, the best offensive tackle duo in the NFL. And like I said, offensive tackle is one of the most important positions in the National Football League.
Generally speaking, our tackle is more important than the interior line, and is that true for the Saints?
Yes and no. It's actually a great question because the Saints are one of the only teams that I would argue that the interior offensive line is probably just as important as offensive tackles. Now, the Saints' strength is definitely their offensive tackles. Like I said, Armstead and Ramczyk are two, Pro Bowl guys. I mean, they are really good, and they're going to be good for a long time. But interior offensive line, I would argue, is just as important just for the Saints because of Drew Brees' lack of height. And not only is it just kind of a vision thing, like it helps to have offensive linemen who get good push over the middle so he can kind of see over the line. He's not going to be able to do that if the interior offensive line is getting pushed around and bullied. And I will say this about the interior offensive line. We noticed in playoff games, defensive tackles, Aaron Donald, Fletcher Cox, Eagles and Rams. I mean, they were kind of all over Drew Brees. And the interior offensive line didn't play as well as it has. And that's a shame because the Saints really do put a premium on solidifying those three guys. We paid Larry Walford to a pretty huge contract. He's been steady but not spectacular. Max Unger, you remember we traded Jimmy Graham for him. So that was obviously a big deal. And Andrus Peat, we spent a lot of capital on him as well because we picked him in the top 12 overall of the first round when we had so many needs on defense. And that was a very, I wouldn't say hated pick, but very confusing pick at the time for Saints fans who really wanted to solidify the defense. My point is that all three of our interior offensive line starters, the Saints paid a very, very heavy price for. So it just kind of shows the emphasis that the team puts on the interior.
Okay, so break down the individual interior offensive linemen because you talked about how important they are. And I guess I want to know, are those players as good as they need to be given how important it is to us?
I would argue, unfortunately, not. I think Andrus Peat has, kind of a subpar career so far. He really had a down season. He battled a lot of injuries and he had a horrible game against the Eagles, against Fletcher Cox. Again, he was playing with a broken hand, so it's tough to evaluate there. But Andrus Peat has never really developed into the player that we kind of saw. When we drafted him, we were actually kind of considering him a long-term right tackle because he had that much athleticism and size. And we have Armstead at left tackle, and we ended up drafting Ramczyk, so we just kind of put Andrus Peat at left guard, tried to stick him in one position so he wasn't floating around the offensive line. And that kind of crippled his early season development, but he had a down year, and he's owed $9.5 million this year. That's his cap hit this year. I wouldn't be surprised if the Saints kind of look to see if any team with a lot more cap room than we have, see if any team like maybe the Raiders or someone or the Niners would be interested in trading for him. Unger has an 8.7 cap hit for 2019, and it only cost us $1.75 million to cut him. And he's going to be a free agent anyway in 2020. And he's 33 years old, and his play has kind of been declining. So I could see us. It'd be tough to walk away from Unger. It seems like he's a team captain. It seems like he's kind of the leader of the offensive line. But like I said, if they were to cut him, it really wouldn't surprise me that much. And Larry Walford's kind of been a steady but not spectacular player. He's kind of right in line with an above-average right guard starter. Overall, the interior offensive line has been underwhelming, and I do think that the Saints will probably try to address that, at least from the depth perspective, this offseason.
So what about our reserves, though?
Well, we had Jermon Bushrod, a former Saint. He came back to the team. He filled in. He started weeks 10 through 15 at left tackle for Armstead. And like I said, that was kind of when the Saints went into a little offensive slump. It's hard to say how much of that was Bushrod's fault, but Terron Armstead's a significantly better pass protector and run blocker than Jermon Bushrod is. And I did kind of notice the difference when Jermon Bushrod was in there. For example, Terron Armstead played 12 games this year, and he allowed 13 total pressures, and he had 2 penalties. And Jermon Bushrod allowed 11 total pressures and 2 penalties, and he only started 5 games. So similar numbers in terms of what they allowed, in terms of sacks, hits, hurries, and pressures. But again, Armstead played 12 games, and Bushrod played only 5 games, so that shouldn't happen there. Josh Laribius was a guard for us, and he started a few games. He started weeks 1, 3, and 7. He was kind of filling in for 3 games that Andrus Peat missed. But Laribius was not very good, and he's a free agent. I don't really expect to sign Laribius or Jermon Bushrod, who are both free agents. Laribius allowed 9 pressures on 121 pass protection snaps, which is not a good ratio there. And lastly, Will Clapp, former LSU offensive lineman. A lot of people were really happy that we finally drafted an LSU player. It was in the 7th round, but he allowed 11 pressures on 57 pass protection snaps. 1 out of every 5 pass protection snaps, he would allow a pressure, which is not good at all. He is still under contract, but we'll see what kind of role he has going forward. I don't think the Saints are going to be relying on him anytime soon to be starting.
Nick, you already talked about Armstead getting hurt a bunch. So is that something that happens to all of our offensive linemen, or is it just more or less limited to him?
Offensive linemen tend to get hurt probably, I would argue, maybe more than other positions, just because they're taking such a beating down there in the trenches. There's just so much contact that goes on each play. But overall, the Saints offensive line has been able to stay pretty healthy. Like Max Unger started every game last year. Larry Walford started every game last year. And Ryan Ramczyk started every game last year. So the entire right side of our line was extremely healthy for the entire season, which is pretty rare, I guess. It's not, I wouldn't say rare, but it's pretty unlikely. Normally, if you're going to have an entire 3 out of starting 5 offensive linemen play every single game, it's more likely than not that players are going to miss time there. Andrus Peat played 14 of 17 games, which is pretty good. And Armstead, like I said, he did play in 12 games. So overall, we made 77 of 85 possible starts in the meaningful games. So there was only 8 missed starts by our entire, 5 offensive linemen. So that ranks, in the top 10 in the NFL in terms of fortunate health there for the offensive line. So I would say overall, if anything, next year, it's probably more likely that we should expect a little more injuries from the rest of the players, and maybe Terron Armstead, who's probably the most valuable offensive lineman that we have, one of the most valuable players that we have, maybe he'll be able to finally string together a full season of 16 games.
So that wraps it up for the Saints. I think we've done a good job covering the offensive line, and I think next week's State of the Franchise, we should cover the running backs. And I think now is also a good time to transition to the Pelicans. Let's talk about the Pelicans moving forward.
Before we start the next quarter, guys, there's a difference between having insurance and actually being insured. If you want to feel secure about the things you care about most, State Farm agent Josh Loranda will have you covered. Over 10 years of experience, quality customer service, great communication, and no gimmicks. His branch is located right here in Mid-City, New Orleans, and he's my go-to for auto, homeowners, life, flood, and renter's insurance. Do something today that your future self will thank you for. You can email Josh directly at josh@sfmidcity.com for a free quote. Or you can find him on Facebook at Josh Lorando State Farm Agent. Josh Lorando, State Farm Agent.
All right, to start the third quarter, I really want to get into what we should expect out of the Pelicans post-All-Star break. Right now, the NBA is on break. We just had the All-Star game. I think they tip off again on Thursday. The first thing I really want to know is, do we think Alvin Gentry's job is safe? We just saw Dell Demps get fired, but do we think Alvin Gentry is next on the chopping block?
So the report that just came out from Woj was basically saying, and this is quoted, "For now, Gentry and his staff are safe," sources said. The organization has been pleased with how he's navigated the team under difficult circumstances this year. Personally, my opinion on Gentry, I don't think he really has helped us a whole lot, and I don't think he's hurt us a whole lot. I think he's been a mediocre coach, and I think that's true of most coaches. I think if you go across all 30 teams, I think there are really only a few who have a really positive impact and make a substantial difference in winning. I think the rest of them, besides the really bad ones, are really about fit with the players that they have. And that's why it's so important to have a GM and coach on the same page.
Just for our listeners and for my sake, I'm actually really curious. It's not like the NFL to where coaching's such a massive aspect of the game, like one of the most important qualities teams can have as a coach. Like you said, I kind of agree that there are only certain coaches in the NBA that make a real difference in terms of like adding 10 or so wins to a team each year that they otherwise wouldn't get if they had an average coach. But who are some of these coaches that really do make a difference, besides Greg Popovich?
I think Brad Stevens is that good. I think Popovich is my number one. I think Stevens, I think Rick Carlisle for Dallas is really, really good. Those are the guys that, at least if you asked me today, I'd say, yeah, I think these guys make a huge difference. Steve Kerr's always been a little bit more difficult for me to assess because Steve Kerr's got so much talent, and maybe that wouldn't have worked with someone else. I mean, Mark Jackson, when he was there, didn't know that Draymond Green was better than David Lee, and it was actually pretty obvious to people that I don't think you had to be a genius to see it. He was so traditional in his thinking, though, Mark Jackson was, that he didn't realize that Draymond Green was a really, really good player, and he should have been starting over David Lee for at least, a decent while before he actually did. So again, Steve Kerr comes in and that's not an issue. So I think that Steve Kerr is obviously a good coach, but again, it's hard to assess how good he is given that he has so much talent.
I will say this before we get back to the Pels. I will say this about Kerr. I know he has the kind of crutch in his argument that he's always had these superstars, but it's not always easy to take divas like Kevin Durant and get them to share the basketball. You know what I'm saying? It's not – he's got a system. His players are so unselfish. And, Klay Thompson, a sharpshooter in the NBA, Steph Curry, one of the great – probably the greatest shooter of all time. And then Kevin Durant, one of the great players in this league, top 3 player in this league. Draymond's also very good. And that's a bunch of egos, or it could be at least, but Steve Kerr, to his credit, has done a great job of developing a system to where, passing comes first and, getting guys open comes first. And these players aren't just, playing one-on-one, street ball. These guys are moving when they're off ball, and a lot of that is coaching. So I do understand that Steve Kerr, you can make the argument that he's dealing with stars, and he is. But it's not all that easy to be dealing with a bunch of stars and just throw them out there and say, hey, just play, backyard basketball. No, that doesn't work quite like it should. Now, I give Steve Kerr a lot of credit for doing that. But I didn't mean to cut you off, and I want to go back to kind of how you see Alvin Gentry for the Pels.
Yeah, so I think that Gentry, the offense has been pretty good. I mean, the offense this year has been very good. Last year it was very good until Cousins went down, and the defense was very bad. And that sort of flipped for the second half of the season once Cousin went down and they added Mirotic. I think Gentry's got some really good offensive principles. I think that he's someone who could create a really good offense if he has the right kind of personnel. But again, I think most of it is fit, and I think you have to look at what kind of GM's coming in here, and when that GM comes in, does he trust in Gentry? Does he think that Gentry's system fits what he wants to do? And I think that cohesion is really important, and I think that's what's going to come down to is this a coach who's going to get the kind of players that would fit Gentry's system or not? And if it's not, then I think he has to go. It's not that he's such a great coach that his record would supersede any sort of fit issues. I don't think that's the case.
Do you think the interim GM has a chance to stay here long term, maybe get an extension after this year based on what the Pelicans do in the next 25 games, or it's just not a big enough sample size?
I don't think a GM at this point, especially since the trade deadline is over, I think it's be pretty hard to figure out whether or not Ferry is going to be able to handle the job. Now, he has a track record with Atlanta, so this is not like it's his first gig.
Right.
I think that it's ultimately going to come down to what's available. And because of the way that these organizations are structured, there is actually seemingly a good bit of talent out there that is available. It's not like coaching where it seems like any good coach gets plucked up right away. So I think that there might be some opportunities to get someone really good. And I think that's why you really need to do a thorough vetting of what kind of market it is out there.
Who are some of the guys on the Pelicans short list?
Griffin is one of them. So Woj reported this, Fletcher Mackel reported this, that David Griffin, the guy who used to be the GM of the Cavs, is on the short list. And for those of you who don't know, Griffin actually did a good job with Cleveland. One of the issues that Cleveland has is that its owner is Dan Gilbert, and Gilbert does some puzzling things, including calling out a star player. And anyway, get off topic here, but basically that Griffin, I don't think they had a single GM. I was looking at a Cavs article the other day, and they haven't had a single extension for a GM since 2005. So basically, it seemed to be an impasse between Griffin and Gilbert in terms of whether or not he would continue as the Cavs GM. So he's got a reputation as a really smart guy. I think he has a good track record. I think he did a good job with Cleveland when he was there. That's one guy that at least we've been rumored to be going after.
And in terms of player development, hopefully Anthony Davis, of course, won't be playing a lot after the break. But who are some of the guys that you're looking to get some minutes for, and maybe, just maybe, they can contribute for next season?
I think you have to look at Kenrich Williams. I think you have to look at Frank Jackson, and I think you have to look at Jahlil Okafor. Diallo is somewhere in between for me. It sucks that AD's playing at all because Diallo would be getting a lot of those minutes. But I think those are the 3 or 4 guys that I would be concentrating on. I think at this point, Drew is who he is. Drew is a really good player. It's not like you're going to see something entirely different from Drew at this point, or at least it does not seem to be the case. So I think those 4 guys are really the ones that I want to focus on.
What about Julius Randle? His contract's expired, right, at the end of the season. So are we kind of evaluating him for the future, or is it just kind of assumed that we're not going to be able to re-sign him?
It depends on, because he's got a player option, so it's going to depend on whether or not he wants to explore the market. Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. I would suspect that he would not accept that player option because I think he's worth more than $8 million, and I think that someone might want to take a chance on him. Yeah, I mean, I think he's worth. There's some dissension about how good he really is. I think he's a good player.
Me too.
I think he's got a lot of work to do on defense. But at least like some of the things that I'm seeing from him enough to where I'd want to take some sort of chance on him.
I think he's better at racking up stats than he is as an actual basketball player, and some players have that. And this isn't to – I'm not saying he's a bad basketball player. I think he's definitely an above-average starter in this league, and I definitely think he can help teams win championships for sure. But it does seem that he might be better at, getting numbers than he is. I like to say, for a fantasy perspective, I think he's a better fantasy basketball player than he is a reality basketball player.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think he's as good as his stats indicate. I think he's certainly got really good stats, and I think he's an offensive asset. I think his defense has a long way to go, which is not atypical of a guy who's not into his late 20s. It takes a while to figure out NBA defense. So, yeah, I mean, he's a player that I would be happy to see stick around, given that it's not an absurd price tag, and we'll see what happens, but I do think he's going to decline a player option, and because we don't have bird rights on him, I would expect that he will be gone.
Right, and I'm excited about Kenrich Williams. Now, I know he's kind of playing for his basketball life right now. He's playing for a role, but I want play. He looks like a winner. I want players like him to stick around for the team, even if it's just, let's say we get Jason Tatum from the Celtics for AD, even if it's just a role player, him coming off the bench. I like that kind of energy that Kenrich Williams brings.
I think he's someone, there's certainly some things that I like that I've seen. I think it's very, very hard to evaluate guys who are getting minutes on a team like us right now. We're not awful, but it's always, you should always be wary of those second half guys who put up good stats on teams where there really aren't any consequences to losing. I think, I like you, I do think that there are some good things that I've seen. I really like his attitude. He's a guy who seems to be, he's a hard worker. There's one play during, I can't remember which game it was, where we were on defense and I think we stole the ball or it was a long rebound or something, and he just hauled it down the court just to get a layup. And that's not something that you can expect of everyone. And certainly the way that he's trying to fight for his NBA career, that plays into it. But all else equal, it's certainly something that's good to see.
Can we be expecting Anthony Davis to continue playing after the All-Star break, after the whole saga with the All-Star game and everything like that?
Man, I hope not. I'm just so tired of this. I think given all the drama and stuff it's just exhausting. I can't imagine being part of the franchise. And I think, all this BS about him playing and not tanking and quote unquote, whatever, it's all garbage. It's distracting. Like, how can you play when someone is openly speaking about leaving your place? Why would you want them in the workplace? This is something like let's take it back to business. Let's just say someone in your office in a highly competitive environment suddenly says, I'm actually taking a job somewhere else. Now, it's not unreasonable that they might stick around for 2 weeks or whatever to finish up their duties, but I don't think it'd be unreasonable for the company to say, get out of here. We don't want you here anymore. You're going to go work for a competitor or whatever it is. I don't think that's an unreasonable response, and that's why I don't think it'd be unreasonable for them to sit him. I don't see why the NBA or anyone or whatever is holding the Pelicans back from sitting him. I don't get it, and I know I'm ranting, but I really do feel that. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, it certainly seemed like in that Orlando Magic game that the Pelicans looked so dysfunctional just because Anthony Davis the whole saga was kind of bringing the team down. Like, the team was ready to move on in that game. They looked like they didn't want to be there. And we still have 23 games. We still have 23 games left.
Didn't he I think he said something to the effect of, it seems like no one wants to be here. And the irony of that is just insane. He's saying that, and he's the one who wants to leave. I might be misquoting him, but just this any idea that other people might be distracted or not wanting to win. Come on, man. What do you expect? You just openly asked to leave. You're clearly our best player. Now the franchise doesn't want to play you so that you don't get hurt, because you've been hurt a lot of your career and dinged up and all of that. So this whole thing just floors me. It just doesn't make any sense. And I'm tired of it. I'm done. I'm tired of it.
Right. We're getting exhausted talking about it for 3 podcasts. I can only imagine how exhausted the actual team is getting with dealing with this every day. It's awkward.
Yeah.
It's awkward, and it's uncomfortable, and it's really unnecessary, to use another word there. All of this could be fixed if they just shut them down for the season, and the NBA would just kind of bite its tongue and just say, okay, the next 23 games, if you sit out, it's not actually detrimental to the league. Because this looks like, to me, that if they keep forcing Anthony Davis to play, then it seems, based on what's happened in Orlando and so far, all of this has only happened in 3 games, by the way. Everything we've talked about, it's only been 3 games since. And if we have that for another 23 games, that seems detrimental to the NBA.
Yeah, this whole circus needs to end. That's my opinion. I just sit them, face the consequences, and yeah, whatever, it's monetary stuff. If there really truly is a penalty, if that's not just something that was alleged, I think you got to get rid of this. Just, I'm done.
Our fourth and final quarter of the show is our Best Questions segment, where we tackle your best questions. Reminder, you can tweet us your questions at BestPodcastNOLA using the hashtag BestQuestions. and we'll debate them live in the fourth quarter of each show.
Our first question is by Josh Gass from Denham Springs. He wants to know, does it hurt LeBron James' legacy that he's never participated in the dunk contest?
I don't think it helps his legacy, but I don't think that it's something that we should say he is or isn't the player that someone else is because he didn't win a dunk contest. I think it's pretty clear that LeBron would do at least fairly well in that contest given how athletic he is, or how athletic he was when he was younger. I don't think it hurts his legacy, though.
I tend to disagree, actually. I do think it affects his legacy in a very slight way. I don't think it's meaningless because when you talk about LeBron James' legacy, you're comparing him to who? To Michael Jordan. And if Michael Jordan participated in these dunk contests and maybe even won some, I do think LeBron James should have at least participated in one. I think it's crazy a guy of his athleticism, probably the most athletic athlete in the world, some would argue, has not participated in just a kind of a dunk contest. It really doesn't matter to me if he wins the thing. I just am bothered by the fact that he's never participated once in his, what has he been playing for 14 years? That seems strange to me. And I'm not going to say like that, when you're judging Michael Jordan and LeBron James' legacy at the end of the careers that Michael Jordan won the dunk contest in, 96 or something. I'm not going to say that that's actually a relevant point. But if they're that close, I want a guy who's like eager to compete. I think that's what a lot of people say about LeBron. That's kind of the knock on LeBron James is that, he doesn't have the clutch gene or the kill factor that Michael Jordan has. And I do think it kind of fits into that narrative that LeBron refuses to participate in this contest. And I'm not even saying that he's scared. I think he would definitely win. But it is strange to me. And I do think it affects his legacy just a little bit, only because his legacy at this point is only compared to Michael Jordan. I think that LeBron James is the second or first best basketball player to ever play in the game. And I think that he's really only competing in legacy for Michael Jordan. Why do you think LeBron James hasn't participated?
I don't think it's an injury thing. I don't know what it would be, though. Maybe he's thinking if he doesn't win, that's a knock against him. That would sort of support your theory. I'm just putting stuff out there. I don't know which one of those are feasible. What else? Maybe he just doesn't feel like it. I don't know. But it doesn't make a lot of sense. I do think that he should have done it at some point. I don't think it hurts his legacy, but I do think that he should have at least tried it.
It is possible that he's, like I said, he's been so durable and he's played in all these games and this team's relied on him for so long. And he's always been so healthy that maybe he actually really wants to utilize the All-Star break. Maybe he actually really wants to rest. But I don't know. He's been playing in the All-Star games, though, so that kind of refutes that. Yeah, it's a really tough question, actually. I don't really know why he doesn't want to participate.
Okay, so our next question is from John R. out of Oakdale, Louisiana. He wonders, who are the most valuable players on this team? And just give me your top 5.
Top 5 most valuable. Now, the interesting thing about that question is that it's not best players on the Saints team, because I would actually have a different answer for best. I think we can both agree that valuable or value doesn't necessarily mean best.
Let me challenge you on that, because I don't like that argument, right? Because they're only valuable because players around them aren't as good or are better than they need to be, right? So doesn't that I guess I hate the argument of most valuable versus best.
I didn't,
and I kind of cut you off in the middle of your answer. But.
No, I didn't mean to say it in terms of. I think that's a fair point, especially when you get into MVP conversations. It's tough to say this guy's backup is better. And I don't take it that strict in terms of value, but I do take it in the sense of positional value is kind of what I meant there. I think if you're talking about the best players on the Saints team, you're going to mention maybe Alvin Kamara, very high. He's one of the most talented players on the Saints team, best players. But in terms of value, I actually don't know if I put him in the top 5, and that's probably my only controversial ranking here. Number 1 would be Drew Brees, of course. Number 2, without question to me, would be Cam Jordan, defensive end. Number 3, just over the years, just kind of seeing our splits with and without him. I mentioned earlier, we talked about offensive line. I think Terron Armstead is not necessarily our third best player, but our third most valuable player. I think that you can notice a difference when he's not playing. Certainly we have a small sample size that we saw this year where we noticed our offense drop off without him. And not to mention offensive tackle, probably the third most important position in all of football behind, quarterback, Drew Brees, and defensive end, Cam Jordan. Next comes offensive line, offensive tackle, and I would put Terron Armstead as our third most valuable player. Fourth, I'm going to go with Michael Thomas. And now I'm catching myself kind of using the thing you just criticized me for. I'm catching myself kind of saying we don't have any receivers behind him, so he's very valuable to the team. Like, for example, if Michael Thomas got hurt and we were left with, Traquan Smith and Ted Ginn at receiver, that would not be good for us. He's been a total baller since the moment he stepped on the field as a rookie. He's just such a great player. I'm not going to put him as a top 3 receiver in the NFL. I do think, a fully healthy like DeAndre Hopkins, Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham's probably better than Michael Thomas overall, but he's definitely top 5. And for the Saints, he's just so critical for our offense. And then number 5, and this is the tough part, I got a tough time between Alvin Kamara, who's so valuable to our team, and he's also great. He's such a great player. He's so versatile and just so hard to tackle, and he brings such a different dynamic to our offense. But also Marshawn Lattimore. You don't want to forget about him, the cornerback, our best cornerback. And it's kind of another Michael Thomas example. If Lattimore got hurt, man, we would really be torched in the secondary. So I'm going to actually say Lattimore, and I know it's bold, and I hate to leave Kamara out of a top 5 list in anything, but just in terms of the value, I think if you had a draft between every NFL team and every player was a free agent, and it's just for this year, who's going first? Drew Brees. Who's going, the next Saints player to go out to Drew Brees is definitely Cam Jordan. I would argue the next player is probably Terron Armstead, and then I think Michael Thomas would go, and then I think Marshawn Lattimore would go ahead of Kamara. So I'm gonna stick with my answer. I'm gonna leave Kamara out of the top 5.
I think it's bold, but I think that I've always wondered about players who are outside of our system and how good they would be, especially at skill positions, given how good Brees is. So, Kamara is obviously awesome at what he does, but he's also probably in a perfect system for what he's good at. So you might say the same about Brees, but I think you can especially say it about a lot of the running backs that we've had and the receivers that we've had.
I know Kamara he's a much more talented player than Sproles is, but Sproles was excellent in the role as a pass-catching back for the Saints. And like you said, if Kamara didn't have a quarterback who could accurately deliver these passes to Kamara, while he's in stride, that's something that Brees is so good at, like actually hitting him on the run. If your quarterback's not that accurate, Kamara, he's still a very good player, but he's not putting up these numbers that, we're seeing. And the Saints offense just kind of makes life easy on a running back. And again, it's just so tough. Kamara is such a good player. But like you said, running back might be one of the most, if not the most, replaceable position in the NFL. So let's move on to our next question. And that is from Keegan Keller, who just moved to Baton Rouge. And he wants to know, this is a great one here. I love this question. Would you rather be able to dunk like Vince Carter or be as accurate as Steph Curry from behind the arc? I got to hear your answer, Michael. That's probably our best question that we've got so far.
Man, I'm still young enough. I'd go Vince Carter. That's a hard question because Steph Curry will age that well because he's shooting threes isn't going to fall off a cliff quite like dunking has. But man, that's a tough question. Vince Carter, because if you've ever dunked on those goals where like the rest of us regular people, you're dunking on like 7 and 8 foot goals. It's fun, man. It's just so much fun. And doing that on a 10-foot goal and dunking over people, like when he dunked over that French guy a long time ago. Man, that seems like it'd be so much fun.
We are 0 for 2 on the or 2 for 2 on disagreeing on the basketball things. I'm going with Steph Curry here, but you actually already hit my counter.
Okay.
You already hit one of my main arguments though, in your concession. And that is this is a transferable skill, hitting a three like Steph Curry could. This is something that you can carry with you like throughout your life, honestly. You can always have that sweet stroke and drop dimes on people. And when you go to the rec, yeah, people are going to be intimidated by your dunk. But if they're giving you any room whatsoever, you actually got to get into the lane to use your skill to dunk like Vince Carter. But you can always hit threes from behind the arc when they're not covering you. I mean, he's shooting from like the moon. So I don't know. Like I want to give you some props there, because I want to say that, if you're a single guy like you are, I think it plays a role, because I think that if you can dunk like Carter, that's more impressive to the females, I think. Like if you're in there doing 360 dunks on these guys on the rec, and there's any girl jogging around, that's noticeable. You're going to be noticed, and
I don't know why every question revolves around the rec, but if I can dunk like Vince Carter, I don't think it matters about getting the lane at the rec, because I think I'd be so athletic that it wouldn't matter. But I guess you're right. It definitely, if I have to analyze this with anything, I'm sure it relates to me being single.
Oh man, that's harsh. But yeah, I'm gonna go with the Steph Curry over that. Now, don't get me wrong, the dunking is sweet, it's flashy, it's awesome. But I'm going to go with the more transferable trait, or I guess elongated trait, the trait that lasts the longest, because I don't know, man. I want that forever.
And that's the end of our fourth quarter. If you like what you heard, make sure you become one of our best friends by subscribing to this podcast and giving us a great rating on iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter @BestPodcastNola. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our sponsors. We'll be back next week. Tell all your friends. Who dat?